For decades, American homeland defense has rested on a single, deeply embedded strategic assumption that any large-scale missile attack against the United States would be detected early, tracked continuously, and intercepted before reaching its target. This assumption shaped U.S. defense planning from the Cold War onward. It influenced radar architecture, interceptor placement, satellite constellations, and the very logic of command and control decision-making. Missile defense was never assumed to be perfect. It was not designed to guarantee absolute protection. Rather, it was meant to provide sufficient warning, sufficient interception capability, and sufficient confidence to deny an adversary the possibility of strategic surprise. For decades, that logic appeared sound. Today, that assumption no longer holds, not because American defenses have failed, but because a new category of weapons has emerged that exploits vulnerabilities those systems were never designed to confront. Hypersonic weapons do not defeat missile defense through volume or saturation. They defeat it structurally by compressing timelines, undermining prediction, and operating in regions of the battlespace where existing defenses struggle to function. The result is a strategic reality that is difficult to ignore. For the first time in modern history, the continental United States faces weapons for which no comprehensive, reliable defensive shield currently exists. Hypersonic weapons are typically defined as systems capable of sustained flight at speeds exceeding Mach 5. While this definition is technically accurate, it significantly understates their true military significance. Speed alone does not explain why these weapons are destabilizing. What matters is how speed interacts with maneuverability, altitude, and detection. There are two primary categories of hypersonic weapons. The first consists of hypersonic glide vehicles. These systems are launched into the upper atmosphere by rocket boosters before separating and gliding towards their targets at extreme speed. Unlike ballistic warheads, glide vehicles are not bound to predictable trajectories. They can maneuver laterally and vertically, altering course throughout flight. The second category consists of hypersonic cruise missiles. These weapons remain within the atmosphere and rely on advanced air-breathing propulsion to sustain velocity. While they fly lower than glide vehicles, they retain maneuverability and exploit the same detection challenges. In both cases, the defining feature is not speed alone, but unpredictability at extreme velocity. This places hypersonic weapons in a flight regime that sits between traditional ballistic missiles and conventional cruise missiles. It is precisely this intermediate zone where U.S. missile defense coverage is weakest. Hypersonic weapons do not simply fly faster than existing threats, they fly differently in ways existing systems were never optimized to counter. American missile defense architecture evolved in response to a very specific challenge: intercontinental ballistic missiles following predictable, physics-driven trajectories. Systems such as ground-based mid-course defense, Aegis ballistic missile defense, and THAAD were engineered to detect launches early, calculate stable trajectories, and intercept warheads either in space or during terminal descent. This defensive model depends fundamentally on time. Early detection provides decision-makers with minutes, sometimes tens of minutes, to assess a threat, confirm intent, and authorize interceptor launches. Hypersonic weapons undermine this logic by remaining below traditional satellite tracking for much of their flight, while traveling too quickly for reliable late-stage interception. This does not represent a failure of American engineering or competence. Against conventional ballistic threats, existing missile defense systems remain effective. The problem is structural rather than technical. Missile defense was designed for a battle space defined by altitude, predictability, and warning time. Hypersonic weapons are deliberately engineered to avoid all three.
The most serious vulnerability exposed by hypersonic weapons lies not in interception, but in detection and tracking. Missile defense is not a single event, it is a continuous process that begins with launch detection and ends with terminal engagement. Hypersonic weapons disrupt this process at multiple stages simultaneously. Low-altitude flight allows these systems to remain concealed behind the radar horizon for much of their trajectory. Continuous maneuvering further degrades tracking stability, as even minor course corrections can invalidate interceptor solutions calculated seconds earlier. At extreme velocities, atmospheric friction generates plasma effects that distort radar and infrared signatures, reducing sensor clarity. Defense analysts describe this challenge as a loss of sensor custody.
Without cyber, the missile warning mission just doesn't happen.
This refers to the inability to maintain a continuous, high-confidence track on a target from launch to interception. Without that track, interceptors cannot be guided with sufficient precision. In some scenarios, defensive systems may never receive the data required to authorize a launch at all. This is the core of the hypersonic problem. Not speed, not maneuverability, but the erosion of certainty in the defensive decision-making chain.
If this is the first time you're encountering sensor custody, it is worth pausing here because this single vulnerability underpins almost every limitation facing modern missile defense. In the following sections, its consequences become impossible to ignore. Even if detection and tracking challenges were resolved, missile defense would still face a more fundamental limitation: scale. Missile defense is most effective when protecting discrete, high-value targets, such as military installations or forward-deployed forces. Defending an entire nation presents a categorically different problem. The United States is geographically vast. It contains dozens of major population centers separated by thousands of kilometers. Providing continuous hypersonic defense for each city would require hundreds of sensors, interceptors, and command nodes operating simultaneously. The financial cost would be immense. Coverage gaps would be unavoidable. Hypersonic weapons exploit this imbalance. They are often cheaper to deploy offensively than comprehensive defensive networks are to sustain. This creates a cost-exchange dynamic that strongly favors the attacker and renders nationwide defense strategically impractical. This vulnerability is not theoretical. Russia has already deployed multiple hypersonic systems, including the Avangard glide vehicle, the Kinzhal air-launched missile, and the Zircon hypersonic cruise missile. Several of these systems have been used operationally, demonstrating that hypersonic weapons are no longer confined to controlled testing environments. China has pursued a similarly aggressive trajectory. The DF-17 hypersonic missile system is deployed, supported by one of the most extensive hypersonic testing programs in the world. In 2021, China conducted a fractional orbital hypersonic test that surprised US defense officials and demonstrated a potential global strike capability. By contrast, the United States remains largely in the development and testing phase for both offensive hypersonic weapons and defensive countermeasures. While American programs are technologically sophisticated, they remain years away from full operational maturity, creating a temporary but strategically significant gap. The United States is attempting to close this gap. New space-based sensor layers are being developed to improve continuous tracking of hypersonic threats. Interceptors designed to engage weapons during their glide phase are under development, and directed energy concepts are being explored as longer-term solutions. However, these efforts require time for testing, time for integration, time for deployment. Even optimistic projections suggest that meaningful defensive capability will not be available until the early 2030s. Until then, hypersonic weapons will continue
continue to challenge existing defense architecture. The emergence of hypersonic weapons signals a fundamental shift in strategic reality. Defense, once assumed to be the foundation of homeland protection, is increasingly supplemented by deterrence. Rather than relying on interception, security now depends on discouraging attack through the threat of retaliation. For U.S. cities, this represents a sobering conclusion. Protection is no longer guaranteed by technology alone. In a world where speed erases warning, the central strategic question is no longer whether hypersonic weapons can be stopped, but whether stability can be maintained when time itself becomes the decisive weapon.
If this analysis has reshaped the way you think about modern warfare and strategic defense, then it is worth continuing the conversation. Hypersonic weapons are not a future concern. They are already influencing doctrine, deterrence, and global power balances. For further analysis on how emerging technologies are redefining war and security, consider subscribing to the channel. New briefings are released regularly, each focused on the systems and decisions that will shape future conflicts. And if there is a specific aspect of modern warfare you would like examined next, join the discussion below. In an era where speed erases warning, understanding the battlefield has never mattered more.